Welcome to the Wisconsin new multifamily net metering rule, sorry, excuse me, Wisconsin's new multifamily metering rules. Really excited to have this webinar and talk about these new rules that are being put in place, and give an update for you. We have a really great panel group of panelists today. Um, we have Ciaran from Clean, Kathy from Dane County, and Grant from Keys and Fox. I'm really excited, really great panelists for you today. My name is Ben Behlke. I'm the Clean Technology and Programs Manager at Renew Wisconsin, and I'll be moderating it. Just a little bit of housekeeping rules in terms of Q&A and questions. If you guys could put those in the chat, and we'll kind of aggregate those and save those for the end. And yeah, we'll get started right away. So first off is Ciaran. Ciaran is the Energy and Air Manager at Clean Wisconsin. She works with utility regulation and energy policy. She advocates for Wisconsin's clean energy transition to mitigate climate change and reduce air pollution. Ciaran also holds a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a concentration in energy analysis and policy. So Ciaran, you are up.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to try to share my slides. Okay, how does that look for everybody?
It is, oh, looks good. Oh, Ben, do you
Great.
want to talk about Q&A real quick before Ciaran gets started?
Yeah, we'll take the questions in the chat and then we'll save those to the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there and we'll aggregate those for the end.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm Ciaran. I'm with Clean Wisconsin, and today I'm going to give an overview of the recent rulemaking changes that happened at the PSCW on the 113.0803 individual metering requirements. So this was a lengthy 2-year process. The commission opened the rulemaking docket in April 2023, and there were multiple public comment opportunities. Most of the groups on this webinar participated in this docket fully throughout the process. But to skip to the end, this last June, the commission, during an open meeting, discussed how they wanted to move forward with the rules based on the public comments, and staff drafted proposed rules, and they directed staff to redraft those rules consistent with their pretty lengthy discussion. A month later, the Evers v. Markline, Wisconsin Supreme Court decision ensured that this rulemaking would not be blocked by the legislature. And then in quick order, Governor Evers approved the rule. There was a legislative hearing in September, and the rules went into effect December 1st, 2025. So these rules are already in effect, and let me dive into what has happened. So the old status quo was you had to apply for a waiver for the individual metering requirements. This was a lengthy process in commission docket. It was created unnecessary administrative burden for PSC staff, who had to make sure the docket was robust enough for the commissioners to make a decision. It often required that the developers or applicants hire lawyers, increasing costs of the project. And then at the end of the day, the language around waivers had a very narrow and, at this point, technologically outdated path for a waiver. So even after months of going through this docket application process, many of these waivers were being rejected by the commission. So the new rule is there are now greater conditional exceptions to the rule. We think these provide greater clarity to developers and applicants. and expand the number of reasons for why you can get conditional exceptions to the rules. Finally, it removes this administratively burdensome PSCW process of going through a docket, which we think which will enable commission's staff limited time and resources to focus on the many other fire hose of dockets and cases that they are dealing with. So now I'm going to dive into each of the rule changes in granularity. So the first is that existing buildings are no longer subject to the 113 rules. The commission has struck all language referencing existing buildings. Previously, if there was a change in occupancy or substantial remodeling, or a building that was not subject to the rules would then be subject to the individual metering rules. We think this is going to have a really large impact on some of the hotel to apartment conversion projects we were seeing, and other large renovations of apartment buildings that were built before this rule was in place, and therefore were grandfathered into not having to comply with individual metering requirements. And so this will enables a lot more of these existing buildings to move forward, renovate, create apartments without having to rip walls apart to install this expensive technology. So one of the new exceptions is affordable housing, specifically buildings that are under contract with local, state, or federal affordable housing programs. We've seen a number of projects seeking waivers in the last few years that would have been applicable for this exception, and we think that this is a clear win for affordable housing to reduce the cost of these projects, and in many ways these projects we're also reducing the energy burden of their tenants. So we're excited that this new rule is going to enable a lot more of these types of projects to move forward in Wisconsin. Next is an exception for a whole building design that meets high energy efficiency standards. This is you can see the language on the slide. So specifically, if the building design entirety meets high efficiency standards or participates in programming for newly constructed buildings. This reference is specific to the Focus on Energy program, but the other similar programs could be LEED or Energy Star certified buildings. As you can hear through the commission's discussion during that open hearing, the intention was to not name specific programs, to either narrow what programs are relevant, and also not to ensure that this rule can remain relevant for many, many years, and not pigeonhole standards that may become obsolete, or maybe a new whole building standard emerges in the next 5 years. If it's not named here, then it's can't be used. So this allows for the flexibility for different types of whole building standards. Lastly is, I think, the wonkiest of the new exceptions, and is a bit of a modification of what had been the waiver language. So I'm going to first read it and then kind of break down what all of this means. And so this new exception is for energy efficient apartment units, saying that the electric equipment under tenant control meets established high energy efficiency standards, consistent with standards used in a statewide energy efficiency programs, federal energy efficiency standards, or similar. and that the average electric energy use per unit is projected to be less than half of the average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin, based on the previous 5-year averages of U.S. Energy Information Administration data, Wisconsin energy statistics, or similar state or federal government data. On-site energy technologies that offset overall usage shall be factored into usage projections. So that one's pretty wonky, but let's dive into what that means. First, it's naming that equipment under tenant control. That can be refrigerators, laundries, and AC if the temperature is controllable by tenant, must meet high efficiency standards. Again, they explicitly reference the focus on energy program, so that could be appliances that are eligible for those rebates. But we also think that it can relate to Energy Star certified or other energy efficient certifications. Similar to the previous exception, the Commission's intent was to ensure that these rules remain relevant and flexible as certification programs come and go. And then the second piece to that is that the average electricity energy usage per unit is projected to be less than half of average monthly residential use per customer. We think that some information, you can find some of that information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, specifically Table T5A. But again, it's broad enough that can survive either that specific information being sunsetted or new information data being collected. But we think that that could be a source of that energy use per customer right now. Finally, the reference to on-site energy technologies is really getting at solar and storage can offset any usage projections. We saw a ton of waiver application projects that would have incorporated solar and or storage. And the Commission was very explicit in their discussion and in these rules that these technologies and maybe novel technologies that offset electricity usage by the tenant can be included in these calculations. The Commission maintained a waiver backstop. However, they removed any of the qualifying language that had been there. Again, that got turned into that latest complicated exception I just talked about. But something that we advocates want to emphasize today is that the waiver application docket process is not the appropriate avenue to demonstrate that projects qualify for exceptions. That was something that we think it's very clear from the Commission discussion, that this waiver backstop is intended for unforeseen circumstances, maybe in years down the road if something comes up that they weren't thinking of while they develop these rules, and that one of the reasons for updating these rules and converting the waivers into exceptions is to reduce the process at the PSC itself. If you have any questions or issues with demonstrating exception applicability for your project, you can contact the Commission's Consumer Affairs, and they're able to talk through that with you. Want to point you to a number of resources. So we have the order adopting the proposed rules in the PSC's docket. We have the statute language is been posted. There's the Commission open meeting discussion you can watch on YouTube. It's lengthy, but illuminating. Again, Consumer Affairs is a good person to reach out to. And in Dane County, Kathy Kuntz is very knowledgeable, as you'll hear, and is another good resource, especially if your housing development project is meeting some roadblocks. finally, I'm just gonna quickly, I think these slides are going to be sent out to webinar participants afterwards, but just want to highlight that I've included an appendix that includes the new statute in its entirety, the previous statute, and track changes. So you can see very specifically how all of these changes were made. That is all that I have prepared for today. Look forward to your questions afterwards and the other panelists' presentations.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ciaran. That was really great. Next, we have Kathy. Kathy is the, let me move my screen. Kathy is the director of Dane County's Office of Energy and Climate Change and the board president for Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition. She has more than 30 years of experience in the clean energy space and climate action in Wisconsin, and was a really great driver in helping us understand the viewpoints of governments and their role within these rules. So, Kathy, take it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to Ciaran for giving that terrific overview of how the rules have changed. I'm really going to focus on why I'm so excited about these updates to the rules and why particularly the local governments in the room and the folks who care about affordable housing across Wisconsin should be excited too. So okay. So, I think Ciaran had a picture of the same development. It's like 4 years ago now, the River Falls 1,300 residence facility came online, and it's this super efficient development where the households do not have individual meters and I remember when I first heard about WestCap doing that project, I was super excited and I was like, we need to do this everywhere. And then it was really clear that under the old rules, it was really hard to innovate in and to embrace rooftop solar and geothermal heat pumps for whole building clean energy technologies. That essentially the way that old rule was constructed, we were limiting low and moderate income access to lower, or in the case of the building in River Falls, no utility costs. There's a really compelling video out there that was made about this building. And I mean, I want you to just think a moment about that building got a ton of attention. This clip is like from HUD. Everyone was like, this is amazing, but we couldn't build more of them because the rules were standing in our way. And so, we really big deal. Ciaran touched on this too. The old rule made it really difficult to do conversions of buildings into multifamily housing. We know that we need a lot more affordable multifamily housing. We know that we have hotels that would be good to convert. And we've seen, this is a picture from one of the stories that was in the Isthmus here locally in Dane County, that in some case, it often was completely impractical to add individual meters to all of those units. And really it was stymieing our process here. So we are super excited about these changes. That again, the really big things here, that there are no requirements for building conversions and that there are clear waivers for new construction. I think Ciaran would say I shouldn't use the word waiver there. I should use exception. That there are clear exceptions, and exceptions fall in kind of two broad buckets. If this is an affordable housing project, that creates an exception, and if it meets one of two roads to energy efficiency there. And so I'm deeply grateful that the commission heard all of the folks talking about why these rules needed to be clearer, why the rules were holding us back from embracing clean energy technologies. This was a really, really good outcome, and I think it gives us this increased clarity on this situation that we didn't have before. I also think this is going to facilitate more energy efficient, affordable housing. Because the process is now an exception process, it's going to go faster. That's going to help us build more affordable housing faster. And the new rules essentially create incentives for more efficiency and clean energy options in these projects, because that's how you get the exception. You also, if it is an affordable housing project, WIDA has strong preferences too for energy efficiency and clean energy. So I feel like we're doing some stuff here that really ensures we're going to get more energy efficient, affordable housing out of this process. And, that's just a good outcome for all of our communities. I am part of this webinar today because I have been really outspoken about, as these rules went into effect, this is a hugely important change in the rules, and I believe local governments have a really important role in understanding and supporting these new rules. That I'm, grateful to our friends at Renew and Elevate and Clean Wisconsin for organizing this webinar. They've also created an amazing fact sheet that Elizabeth is going to share in the chat or in the follow-up email with you all. I really want to challenge my local government colleagues, especially planning departments, to become familiar with the new rules, to have the fact sheet, and Grant is going to talk about how various utilities are implementing this, those implementation tools handy for developers so that folks understand what the rules are and can move forward to implement this. This is a sea change in what we can do in these buildings. And now it's really up to us to make it easy for our developer partners to make sense of this and make it happen in our communities. So we are super enthusiastic about all of this, and we really want to see local governments play a key role in supporting the implementation of these rules so that we get more energy efficient, affordable housing across the state. And with that, I am going to turn it back to Ben.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that perspective. Next up, we have Grant Snyder. Grant Snyder is a senior associate at Keys and Fox LLP. Grant has represented several individual homeowners and nonprofit organizations in their attempts to obtain master meter arrangements for their properties. He also recently wrote a great article in the Wisconsin Bar explaining the Public Service Commission's rulemaking and its impacts on developers seeking to install rooftop solar on multifamily housing facilities. So, Grant, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Happy to be here. So I'll be describing the things that the utilities have done and really kind of are in the process of doing regarding the various processes that they're going to utilize for actually confirming these agreements with developers. So Kathy brought up a great kind of a point here, or a great example related to housing initiatives in the article that was in the Isthmus, which was actually one of our clients and the way that we had intersected with this process. So prior to the updates to PSC 113, some of the utilities were taking the position that if you wanted to qualify for an exemption, even things that might otherwise be included within 113, you had to go to the commission, and you actually had to go to the commission and you had to ask them for relief, which obviously added a ton of burdens for folks who otherwise were not able to afford counsel, and for entities like supportive housing facilities that were not in the position to be able to, obtain counsel for these types of things. And then in the subsequent months since then, we've obviously now had the changes, and specifically as it relates to my practice, the changes in the multifamily facility or the multifamily section, which will relate to the new buildings, existing buildings, and then buildings that have a relationship with a federal housing program and the way that they are going to intersect. So, as these things came online specifically for housing initiatives, the question that came up and the question that you all are going to have to navigate as well is like, okay, well, then how do we actually work with this process? How do we actually, confirm that this is the way that we want to proceed? And how is that like noted in ongoing dialogues with the utility? So for MG&E, MG&E has made this a very simple process at this point. They have devised a form, and the form asks essentially of the new additions to PSC 113, which do you qualify for? It has the entity certify wh- which one of the new exemptions that you qualify for. And then you send that form back to MG&E's manager for gas and electric service and new development engineering. And I can provide contact information after the fact. And as I've understand the process for interacting with MG&E, this individual will be the point person to receive applicate or to receive the forms, and then will in specific folders that obviously are maintained on the MG&E side for what projects are going to be allowed in master meter and what the scope of work is going to be for MG&E, that they will coordinate that so sort of like a top-down perspective after receiving the certification form. And then the next step that was presented to housing initiatives as it related to after it had filled out the form was to file a request for the demolition of existing MG&E services that will become master metered. And that was provided to housing initiatives via online portal. So Housing Initiatives has taken both of those steps at this point and understands that it is still in the construction process, but understands that when it comes time to solidify project design and actually complete the project, that it will be able to obtain a master meter. And I should add the reason for that is that it is one of these, it's supported by it has a contract with a federal affordable housing program. So that is the exemption which we are saying that it fits through. So from talking to other panelists, it seems my experience is mostly with MG&E, and it's in this context, and then also in other contexts relating to litigation prior to the changing of the PSC 113 rules. But from talking to other panelists, it seems like the other utilities have not yet stood up their processes, but may be poised to take a similar approach as MG&E, where it sounds like they would have a point person who would receive some similar certification forms. So, for example, the group has heard that Excel recently stated that they are drafting an agreement that will need to be signed by the customer, and the agreement would confirm that the customer meets all the necessary requirements for a single building meter, and I would assume would certify which individual category from the new rules that they fit into. But today, Alliant, WPPI, We Energies, and WPS are still in the process of working on a solution, and we understand that it's to be determined at this point. We Energies has said in response to outreach asking them, who should be your point of contact, that any customers or developers can work with their local energy services consultant or service manager who they normally work with while it irons out its final process. So this is still moving here. MG&A, I think, has provided a good and workable forum or a pathway for this to be done that I think that if the other utilities copied, I think that would be a streamlined way to do it. But these things are still be determined a little bit, although I think they will be ironed out soon due to the import of the new rules, and I'm sure you all asking for master metering exemptions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grant. We got a question in the chat right now for John B, or from John B, related to does the PSC 113 apply to Wisconsin non-stock condo associations? And if it does, what does that mean for a condo association that wants to go solar? They're thinking through the four different setups, powering the whole campus, including individual units, just the common areas, a building level system shared across multiple units, or solar just for individual units.
Ben, are you thinking I would specifically take that one?
Yeah.
Okay,
We can open
let
it up
me
to any other presenters if that's
okay,
not
let me
enough.
read it. It's like a hypo on a test. I gotta read it real quick just to make sure I understand what's being asked.
Yeah, you can drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. We've got a couple questions in both locations. Um, and we might need to come back to some questions and do a little digging if
All
that's
right.
the case.
Yeah.
The question that I can handle is this being recorded and will we be sending that link out to everybody? And the answer is yes. It's being recorded. And while Grant reads through that question, I will drop the fact sheet that Kathy mentioned in the chat.
So Grant, reading, there's like two versions of this question about condos.
Yeah.
I think maybe the first clarifier is we're talking about building retrofits or new construction. We're not talking here about existing, if you have an existing condo complex and you're struggling with how you put solar on that existing thing, this rule does not say there's a new way to set up all the meters in your existing building. Like that, that isn't the thing. But if you were building a new condo building, could it apply to a new condo building?
I would think, again, would need to check here. None of this is legal advice, you know. I would think that because of the statement that newly constructed buildings of the multi-dwelling unit residential, um, well, I guess probably the rub here is what are we thinking of as a multi-dwelling unit residential? I mean, d does that include condos? I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I mean, the clearest example is like an actual apartment where these are with the apartments are within what we would think of as sort of like a single structure. Condos, I would think maybe slightly differently. But if we put aside that question, which may be the bigger question to tackle here, the standard would be for new construction, whether it meets energy efficiency standards, high energy efficiency standards, and those are standards that are basically set through participation or through the focus on energy program. So as long as you were following these standards that have been set forth for energy efficiency that Focus has adopted, then yes, I think you'd be able to do that for new construction. That's not the entirety of the battle, as we talked about at the start, for retrofitting, where retrofitting then requires there actually to now be um, I should say for the newly constructed building, you don't have to meet standards offered by Focus. You have to participate in Focus programming. Sorry. That's not, but the standards is different for retrofits in which you actually have to then, and you actually have to reduce tenant usage as well, in addition to meeting these standards. So that's actually the section that talks more about meeting high energy efficiency standards, which are articulated in Focus. But then you also need to reduce on-site load, which you can do through things like solar. So, for example, like you could meet this retrofitting requirement by either adding solar, which reduces on-site consumption, or which reduces, import into the facility, or you could do it through a series of, very energy efficient appliances. So and you can do it both ways too, and you probably would need to do it both ways depending on how you've sized your solar array.
Awesome. And then I see John mentioned he would like to speak about it. Elizabeth, are you able to unmute him by chance?
Yeah, let me do that.
And while you're doing that, we have another question here from Megan related to affordable housing with tax credits, but also uses naturally occurring affordable housing where they use the savings from not paying property tax to offset the reduction of affordable rents. They also enter in a land use restrict agreements. Is there any precedent for the less traditional approach to these counting as under contract with affordable housing program?
I can give you the quick and dirty answer there that under contract with the local affordable housing program has generated no uh, precedent yet because it's such a new change. The way that I would typically think about this is like, for example, if you had a relationship with like Dane County where you were providing like homeless services or something to that effect for Dane County, who may then in turn have a relationship with like HUD or something along those lines. What you're describing is a little bit more exotic. You probably would need to tie it in some way to a locality that is actually like offering an affordable housing program, whether that be, you know, uh, rent subsidies or something to that effect. Um, but the traditional way that you would think about this is like you actually just have a contract to provide services with a state, local, or federal agency.
And I'd also suggest reaching out to consumer affairs at the commission to talk through this. I think Grant made a great point that there is no precedent because this is so new. So as these agreements projects can take place, we would love to hear more about it so we can build a
that I'm a condo owner in River West of Milwaukee. The 2 years ago, I started reaching out to FOE, Focus on Energy, for checking eligibility of condo associations for their programs. We've already received for the building I'm in, which is a 4-unit, 2-floor building, an energy assessment, and a solar PV partner from FOE has come out and done a feasibility on that. So we have to put those two together. The thing that's missing from FOE, and I'd be writing a white paper for them with a debrief on the situation so far, is that they've stretched their multifamily eligibility stuff, applications and everything, to fit condo associations, which of course are under a different state statute. As a non-stock corporation, it's a nonprofit, but a special kind. So they're having to kind of wedge us in, put a round peg in a square hole, essentially, for every step of the process. The vendor process is also difficult because we need multiple scenarios. We don't have we don't have the apartment situation where the owners own the appliances, but indeed that will be a factor to reach the percentage level of energy conservation needed for eligibility for the FOE programs. So I wanted to give your group a heads up so that you start thinking about what I'm telling FOE is necessary, which is we need a separate program, separate applications, separate eligibility, separate regulations for condo associations. It could be very, very fruitful. There are over 4,000 associations in Wisconsin. If we can figure it out for the one where I live, a lot of that will be applicable throughout the state and could result in very quick transitions. For instance, my campus, there are 120 units, 30 buildings. The solar PV review shows that we're pretty good with as far as orientation for solar. We need to do a lot of attic and basement insulation, et cetera. But in the end, another big question is, will the association take this on? What incentives can they get? And can we make use of our copious surface parking lot areas with covered parking that has solar atop it and also provides stormwater infiltration control? And all the pieces there are there for funding of that through the city of Milwaukee, through the sewer district, for FOE, for the solar, et cetera, but everyone's working in their own silos. So it's another problem with the process at this point is we need to do a out of silo approach to gather all the funding that's available, which is a fair amount, at least in Milwaukee County. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope as you go forward, you'll give special attention to the potential for condo associations to take some giant leaps in this area.
Yeah, John, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for sharing that you're making progress with a condo association and engaging with focus on this. Because I think, for 2 years, I was out there talking about the clean energy credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. And almost every time I did a talk, there was someone in the room who said, I lived in a condo association. And I would be like, jeepers, this is going to be the hard question because it is so much more complicated to get this work done. And I think we do need to think about how that all fits in. So everyone is clear, though, the 113 really applies to will there be a requirement for individual meters in a building when it's either being built or retrofitted? So it's like kind of adjacent to all the challenges John is talking about, but not the 113 is not like going to solve John's problem, but he's making a really important point that condos are not very well covered by a lot of our energy policy work right now.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I was referred to this webinar by the FOE and its contractors, its partner vendors. So they think this is a really relevant question. And I believe the reason is because if we go to an all-campus approach where the condo association actually owns the PV, and of course they have to take care of insulation and all that in the attics and basements beforehand, they probably are going to have to figure out a way to work with the utility, since we don't have microgrid permission yet for a project like this, which may well generate enough electricity to cover all the needs of both the association and its owners. In fact, it might actually net positive if we were to build solar over surface parking on a covered parking facility. So these are questions that I think do need to be refined, and hopefully a group will give it a little attention.
But it looks like we have a question in the Q&A. I don't know if this has been answered already. Question from an affordable housing developer. Any recommendations for programs or software that allow you to build back utilities that are centrally metered to the residents? One of the obstacles that we have faced is seeing utility consumption increase when utilities are centrally metered. Did you guys address that one yet, or something similar? That's a tricky one. We might have to dig into that and get back to you. And we can always provide responses in the follow-up email, unless any panelists have thoughts about that. And it's in the Q&A box. Folks can think through that one. And we have one other question in the chat that we might be able to address from Jake. What exactly constitutes a retrofit under this rule? Could installation of solar, energy efficiency, and weatherization or new appliances count?
From my perspective, they could, and I think the question is just to how much money do you want to spend to remove individual meters from all of the buildings? And to me, that seems like a pretty high barrier for buildings that you're not doing a complete overhaul. You're not rebuilding walls or doing big changes. And so I think that is a greater barrier to smaller retrofit projects like you have described here.
Ciaran, I was thinking that the way that might work is if you had an old multifamily building that was built before the rule. So it might be a single metered building and you were doing a ton of upgrades to it. you could feasibly in that get caught in as part of those upgrades, you need to install individual meters. But if you did the solar and a lot of efficiency, you could stay on a single meter, it seems like. Could be.
But any existing building is no longer
Oh, right,
eligible.
right,
So
right.
that case
That
isn't.
you wouldn't need to, right. You wouldn't need to, yeah. So you're right. There shouldn't be a need for that.
So I think the question comes down to cost and um, is it feasible to change the metering structure? And I think that is uh, for the developer apartment owner to decide, and then to ensure that once they do those installations, weatherization, new efficient appliances, ensure complies with that last exception I talked about around the high energy efficiency appliances and energy use per apartment unit is less than one half of the average Wisconsin resident average over the last 5 years.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Did we get to all the questions? I know we've some questions are in the chat, some questions are in the Q&A. I don't want um, any to not be answered or addressed, and we will probably have to get back to folks on some of these questions.
Mhm.
A couple more came in the Q&A. Do you have any data or resources on the trade-off of the upfront costs of additional infrastructure, for example, distribution panels, versus the savings from not paying as many utility connection fees in multifamily?
Well, I think you're saving monthly fees that we have seen increase in recent years in Wisconsin that constitutes hundreds of dollars per month to thousands of dollars per year. And we've heard from developers of multifamily projects that it's actually the installation of the individual meters themselves add considerable time and cost to these projects. And so it's a cost savings for the developer as well as a cost savings for the tenant. In terms of infrastructure distribution panels, I assume that's for a retrofit. I haven't heard of any cases myself where that has been a trade-off or a barrier, but I will keep my ears to the ground to see if that is something that projects moving forward under this new rule is experiencing.
Awesome. Thanks, Ciaran. Okay, we got another question in the Q&A. This was a long one, so if the panelists maybe want to read through it as well. I own my own apartment complexes and I've been waiting for this rule change for quite some time. Awesome. So we're happy that this is now possible. We've been electrifying units where possible and offering features like electric car charging circuits in our attached garages. These are all market rates, so the 50% of the average usage standard seems like a very clever limit employed by the PSC utilities to actually significantly limit which market rate complexes will qualify. Additionally, the electric water heater provision, along with the lack of clarification on whether a heat pump water heater is electric, also seems to be an intentional provision. How are landlords that have heavily invested in electrifying air source heat pumps, geothermal heat pumps, in-unit hot water, etc., how are those landlords, how do they qualify?
I can take a first stab at this, although I think other folks will probably want to say something as well. So the energy statistics that you have to meet is that the on-site energy technologies, they have to be the average. So let me just read this real quick. Average electric energy use per unit is projected to be less than half of the average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin. So I have read that to say that if you do put a lot of utility, or if you do put a lot of appliances on electric, that the answer then is you have to then probably size like you'd have like a solar plus storage, or some sort of solar system that allows you to offset the on-site load. So that's what I was mentioning previously, that you're using offset to be able to actually show that your consumption is going to be less. So this is probably a question of like, oh man, I've put a lot of things in electric. My customer or my tenants' electricity use is going to be probably higher than the average person, even though we're doing a lot of very we're doing a lot of very efficient electrification technologies. To be able to like fully electrify, I think you probably have to figure out what is the sizing of like distributed energy resources that you could use. And I think this is bringing up an important question that maybe other folks will want to talk about. This is not specifically like an electrification rule. And this is sort of an electrification question. It can be used for electrification, but it has to be used in electrification when paired with technologies that would reduce that consumption that we're talking about. And the math would have to work in that standpoint.
The piece I feel like I want to add to that is Eric, I love what you're doing. I would be super interested to see some of your math estimates of what you think your sort of average consumption in a unit is versus that average Wisconsin estimate. Because remember, that's an average Wisconsin residential estimate. So that includes single family homes. We know apartments can be a lot more efficient than single family homes. So you're going to get some gain there. But I think the thing you raised that isn't in the rule at all, that might be a thing that down the road we have to figure out how to deal with, is the EV charging. Kind of. So if you indeed have multifamily structures where multiple tenants are charging EVs, like that should not arguably count in your math of the electricity per unit. But we don't have a very good way. We sort of haven't, and this is a broader issue, that because that's electricity, it sort of just gets thrown in the household electricity right now. But there might be a thing there that, and you might be the landlord who helps us figure that out to like try to clarify, wait a minute, how does, because folks like me care very much that you're putting that EV charging into those units and making renters have the option to be EV owners. I think there is an issue there that might, like, it would be good to dig into the data a little bit and see what's going on there. So I'm sort of volunteering to help you figure that out, or find the right people to help you figure that out, because I think it's a really important issue. And I'm delighted that you're electrifying and putting an EV.
Yeah.
And
Eric, oh, sorry, Ciaran, go ahead.
yeah, I just want to jump in and say I agree with Kathy that I'm interested in looking at your calculations. But to me, the question is if your apartment was required to have individual meters per unit, would this EV charging be under the building's meter that is supplying the lights for common spaces, maybe basement laundry, or would you have EV charging attached to apartment 103? And I presume it would be the former, not the latter, and therefore should not be part of the calculation for that one exception. I think the question on electrifying with air source heat pumps and geothermal heat pumps, I think that there is some good precedent in the waiver process that show the commission did consider those as electric loads. So then the question is, how much tenant control is there? Are they able to change their temperatures? Maybe that's something you could reach out to consumer affairs at the commission to confirm what I'm interpreting from commission precedent. But hopefully, as more apartment units are investing in these technologies, so are homes across Wisconsin. And this reference to Wisconsin residential energy use takes into residential homes across Wisconsin, including single family. And so I hopefully, ideally, as more investment in those technologies in apartment units happens, so does the electricity use across the residential sector in Wisconsin increase, while at the same time our reliance on natural gas decreases. So while electricity is increasing, our energy usage is decreasing. So those are just some of my thoughts, and looking forward to connecting after the webinar.
Awesome. And Eric said he would love to share info and dive deeper. So, okay, it looks like we have another question in the chat from Alex. And this might be a question for you, Grant, since you talked about the utilities processes that are in place. At what stage in a new affordable development can an application for the waiver be submitted? In other words, what level of documentation commitment is needed to demonstrate the development is eligible under the affordability provision? And this might be one for everybody, but
Yeah, I would say one, we're early. So it's not necessarily that there is I don't think there's necessarily a stage yet. If I'm just gonna look this up real quickly. I recall that in the instances that I was dealing with, or the case that I was dealing with for MG&E, this was actually done before, let me just confirm this. This was actually done before applying for the project through with MG&E, like actually applying to have service brought to the project. So I think the answer is probably like as soon as you can, or at least to put this on the radar of folks who, as soon as utilities get their processes together, will be able to accept those requests. But yeah, there's not like a specific time frame that I would say yet that the utilities have adopted. We'll probably end up finding that there will be variations that, they'll say like you actually have to have like project design completed to determine that's actually what you're going to do or something along those lines. I just don't think we've gotten there yet because this is relatively new for the utilities as well.
any other responses, Ciaran, Kathy? All right. And then Heather Ellen has been wonderful and posted the link to the fact sheet in the chat. So check that out. We'll send it out at the end as well with the recording. She also shared the PSE Consumer Affairs Office contact information that Ciaran had in her presentation as well. Looking to see if we're missing any other questions. We can send out contact information for all the panelists as well. So if you have questions after the fact, and I know Kathy, you had said for folks in Dane County to keep you in the loop when projects like this happen. We're all very excited for this rule change and I'm grateful to all the panelists and everyone on the team who helped to bring this about. So we would love to hear success stories or challenges as well. Any other remaining questions? We had an amazing and robust Q&A section on this webinar, which was wonderful. All right, Ben, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, just want to echo that. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much to the panelists again. Really appreciate it. And feel free to follow up with folks if you have those questions. So thanks so much and have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.